This story has been recorded at an Addictive Eaters Anonymous meeting in New Zealand. You can email us at contact@aeanz.org.
And since this is the first Friday of the month, it's a speaker meeting, and tonight we have Janelle.
Thank you, Tina. My name's Janelle. I'm an addictive eater. I was thinking today about what I was going to share tonight, and I kept coming back to my first meeting and what I found at that meeting and what it was like. And then I've found a paragraph from the big book, which I'll just read first, which I really like and I identify with. So it's on page 52 from We Agnostics. When we saw others solve their problems by a simple reliance upon the spirit of the universe, we had to stop doubting the power of God. Our ideas did not work, but the God idea did. And, I believe today that I'm sober by the grace of God, not eating, and know that that God does for me what I can't do for myself, because I certainly couldn't stop myself eating. And I realised once I'd come here and I heard everyone's stories that I'd tried enough things that hadn't worked. I was beyond human aid, and I thought if I was a normal size, I wouldn't want to eat all the time. I thought a diet would fix me from my mid-teens. I thought, well, when I'm a normal size, I won't want to eat all the time, and I'd wanted to eat all the time from as far back as I can remember. As a preschooler, I can remember, I climbed up the cupboards to get to the top cupboard that had the fluoride tablets in it, and ate the fluoride tablets, and that was the end of the fluoride tablets. Mum didn't, she didn't get any more. But I also ate the vitamin C tablets, and we had malt. I didn't really like the malt, but it was sweet. I had that, but I really didn't like the Lane's emulsion. I don't know if anyone knows what Lane's emulsion is. It was a tonic and it was hideous, and I didn't like that. But, I can remember being given a little, would have been a little pot set for your little doll's stove, but it was made out of metal. So I put it on the stove and turned it on, because that's what you do, you cook with it. So I'd climbed up and put the stove on and cooked with my little thing on the actual stove, because I'm going to cook food. I'm not going to pretend to have food with my dolls. I'm going to put it on the stove and cook with it, which is what I did. And so, as far back, I was born, I believe I was born a food addict, and always wanted more. Enough was never enough. And as I got older, the amounts that I wanted to eat got bigger. And if every meal every day didn't feel like Christmas dinner when I was fit to burst, well, I hadn't had enough to eat, And then when I'd felt like that, I felt like I could burst, I would think, oh, well, I'll have something to eat, it'll make me feel better, So my eating was pretty warped, from the word go. And as a result of that eating, I was overweight as a child and obese as an adult. And as I say, when I got to my mid-teens, I thought, well, when I'm a normal size, when I can lose weight and get to a normal size, I won't want to eat all the time. And but I had a lot of eating to do between then and 32 when I got here, having lost weight and got to a normal size, and people congratulating me and saying that I looked wonderful, and nothing had changed. I was slim, but I still wanted to eat all the time, and I knew then that whatever was wrong with me, a diet wasn't the answer. And found our fellowship through the library display, and you could say, was that odd or was that God? you know, that display should be there. And just, you know, throughout the years that I've been coming, there've been so many situations that I haven't orchestrated, you know, and things have been put in my place that have helped me. And so, I came to my first meeting, and here were, a room full of people. There were men there, men and women, and I was pretty nervous about what they were going to be like. I was sure that they would be odd and have purple hair and just be weird, but they were normal looking people, and they were chatting, and they seemed friendly. And when they shared, for the first time, I heard other people's eating, which was like mine, because I thought I was the only one. I didn't know there was anyone who ate the way I ate, because I was, ashamed and guilty. And the puzzling thing was I didn't want to do it. I didn't want to eat that way. But when I started, I couldn't stop, and, I didn't have an off switch with food. So what they had was very attractive to me, and I couldn't have told you what they had, but it was, looking back now, it was a sense of serenity and peace. And they talked about their eating and the things they'd done, and I related to it. And then someone said that she'd eaten out of a rubbish bin. I thought, oh, fancy eating out of a rubbish bin. Well, then I kept coming, and then I thought, so when I was going to throw that food out and put it on the top and made sure nothing was around it in the rubbish bin, and then taking it out, that would technically qualify as eating out of a rubbish bin. So I thought, well, yes, and I'd worked in a bakery when I left school, and, eating the fresh food out of the pig bucket, the pig bin, would technically qualify as eating out of a rubbish bin as well, just began to piece together my story. And, at that first meeting, people talked about, they shared about, what it was like, what happened, and what it was like now. And they talked about coming to meetings and reading the big book and having a sponsor and handing their will and life over to the care of God, and trying, working the steps and trying to help other people. And I could tell that they were different. They weren't just, talking the talk. And I'd been to my doctor and told her I couldn't stop eating. And in the first instance, she suggested a hobby, which didn't work. I went back having been a Girl Guide leader, which was the worst thing I could have probably ever attempted to be. Couldn't wait to get out of there. And then her next suggestion was diet pills. And, I loved the diet pills, and I knew I wasn't going back to get any more, because they made me very happy, but I didn't lose any weight. And I could clean at 10 o'clock at night, which was very unlike me, because I couldn't clean at 10 o'clock in the morning, let alone clean at 10 o'clock at night. So I didn't go back and get any more. And she said to me, well, with a mother like yours, no wonder you ate. And I told her how mean Mum was to me, but I didn't tell her how mean I was to Mum. I didn't give her my side of what I was actually like. So that very first meeting, and I was attracted, I was attracted to what I saw here, and I kept coming. And for a long time, 15 months, all I could see was the weight. And I had no idea, no insight into the second half of the first step, that my life was unmanageable, because that had always been like that, and I just saw my weight. And as time went on, I began to see that the unmanageability was far bigger than my eating and my weight was. And, the top of that list was the crippling shyness and sensitivity and not being able to, I couldn't look people in the eye, I couldn't speak to them without going bright red. I had no friends. I had my one primary school friend who'd kept in touch with me. Felt like I was born without the instruction manual. I had no idea how to do anything. And, if there was money in the bank account, I had to spend it. If the bills came, the power bill came, and I knew that, and I think, how dare they? How dare they send me a bill expecting me to pay it? I'd used the power, but I didn't think I should have to pay for it. So, by the time the third letter came, I knew that was the letter that said, if you don't pay your power within 7 days, we're going to cut it off. And that's when I would begrudgingly pay it. And that happened month after month after month. And my parenting, hopeless parenting, hopeless housekeeper, just, pretty all-round hopeless. So that realisation came one morning, and I knew that I needed to get serious with the program, because I had a sponsor, and she would make suggestions, and I followed them to the best of my ability, and I had done a 4th and 5th step, but I had the little voice on my shoulder that said, you're not that bad, and when she said, was I ringing people, I could say, yes, I was ringing people. I rang the people who weren't home, because I didn't actually want to talk to them. But when she said, are you ringing? Yes, I'm ringing. I know they're not going to be home. I know they're the people that are at work. And then after that day, I believe the surrender happened. I became willing to do what I needed to do, because I knew that my life depended upon it. And, it wasn't what went in my mouth, it was what went on in my head. And, became willing to do the things. And that continues today. And I just know that without this program and without God, and I was very scathing, dismissive of people who went to church. The only time I went to church was at Easter time, because someone had said they give you an Easter egg, which they did. That was the reason I went to church, to get a marshmallow Easter egg. But I'd drive, on a Sunday, church service would have finished, they'd be milling round the door, the minister would be sort of saying goodbye to people as they left, and they looked happy and well dressed, and I hated them, and I thought, God, you must have something missing in your life if you've got to go to church, and here was me, could barely answer the telephone, go out the door, depressed, isolated, lonely, this bleak existence. So, gradually, starting with a really basic concept of a higher power, and it was probably the pictures I'd seen of Jesus with the sheep and the sheep hook thing, and the beard and the long robes, and it's not the belief that I have today. And there've been times when I've had to pray. I've been different situations over the years where my resources I've had no resources whatsoever, and can remember once, my prayer was, please God, and I was given what I needed in that situation. And, there's great comfort in that for me, that I'm not alone. And, I have the fellowship, but, the fellowship aren't there at, 3 o'clock in the morning, or when something awful's happening or whatever, but you know, I have that knowing that that God's there, and you know, the freedom and the joy that I have today, and that wasn't destined to be my reality. You know, I would have been a consumer of the mental health system. My health, you know, goodness only knows. You know, I had my gallbladder out when I was 26. I'd stuffed it through my eating at 26. So, you know, that's not the reality today. And, you know, I'm so grateful that I've got that design for living that I never had. I've got the instruction manual, and keep coming. And, you know, I love that, you know, we continue to get well, you know, and see the wellness in other people. And, grateful to be here. And, you know, it's a gift to know that, you know, I'll die with this disease, but I won't die from it, which is what, you know, would have happened. And lots of days yet, hopefully, before that happens. So thank you, Tina.
Thank you, Janelle.